then I'm okay. But what does God's law say? It's not only with the things we do, it's the things we say, it's the things we, what? Think. A lot of people think, what? If I don't get caught, I'm okay, right? What is that understanding of the law, of God's law? That is it's all about public appearances. Do you think God gave us His laws because He's worried about our public appearance, the way we appear to other people? No. What's He worried about? He's looking at our hearts. That's why Jesus talks about motives all the time. What God is concerned about is what's in your heart. I want to know why you do what you do, not necessarily what you do. Do you remember the parable of the Good Samaritan? Sure you do. There were two guys that were real jerks. Two guys that walked by, right? The priest and the Levite. And we talk about them all the time. You know, they walked by and they didn't do anything. Why do we talk so badly about them? Is it because when they walked by, they kicked the guy when they went by? Is that it? No. Did they do anything bad? No. What made them so despicable is they didn't do what they should have done, right? Now, that puts that whole thing of God's law in a whole other category. How many times in the last week were there things that you could have done that you know were right, that you know were good, and you didn't do them? And you say, well, come on, you know, I can't save the world. What is God doing? What is God doing? You think that's all coincidence in your life? God takes these opportunities and He puts them in your life and He says, now what are you going to do with that? You're going to do the right thing? Are you going to worship me? Or are you going to just do your own thing? You know, we say, God is number one in my life. Well, what you do in that particular situation, somebody needs help. What you do says who's first in your life. If you say, oh, I can't help that person, I got other things to do, what do you say? This is what God is concerned about. And that was what Nicodemus thought. Or Nicodemus didn't think about those things. Nicodemus was all at a superficial level. He was a professor. He was a doctor in do-it-yourself religion. I mean, how many rules did the Pharisees have? You know, even when it came to the Sabbath day. You know, they said, well, you can take 37 steps, but not 38. Then you're working. Then you're breaking the Sabbath. Well, you can cut a slice of bread, but you can't make a sandwich. You want to make a sandwich, you got to make that the night before, because that's work. You know, all these little, minute details that they thought, well, I'm doing all these things right. And they never understood how far they were from God. You know, we get a picture of this kind of mentality from Paul when he wrote to the Philippians Christians. He said, you know, before I knew Christ, I thought I was just like this with God because I was a full-blooded Jew. I was from an elite tribe, the tribe of Benjamin. I went to the Harvard of Pharisee schools. And I was a fanatic about it. I mean, everybody said I was a fanatic. And you know what Paul said? When I came face to face with God's law the way it was meant to be applied, and when I understood what Jesus Christ came to this earth for, everything that I counted as my credentials, I wanted to throw away in the garbage heap. You've got to be born again. Living a new life. It's never going to come from us. And that's what Jesus talks about as He leads Nicodemus through this whole process. He takes Nicodemus to the Old Testament. This is an interesting story. People of Israel, they're wandering around for 40 years in the wilderness, and you might wonder, why did they do that? Did they like to camp? They must have. But there's more than that. They got to the edge of the Promised Land after they had been led out of Egypt from slavery. And they didn't want to go in. They just didn't want to go in. God says, okay, we're going to retool here. We're going to wait 40 years, get another generation, and then we'll go in. Now, if any people had ever had the chance to see God visibly in their daily lives, it was these Jews who camped for 40 years in the desert. Where do you get food in the desert? Out of be miraculous. For 40 years, you probably remember the story from Sunday school. For 40 years, the manna came from heaven, that God sent the quail. And yet what happens? The people still complained. People still wanted to kill Moses, still wanted to go back to Israel or to Egypt. And finally God says, okay, I tried to shower you with blessings, now I've got to discipline you. And so he sends these poisonous snakes into the camp. And people are bit. And people start to swell. And people start to gasp. And there are no vaccines. And they look up to Moses and they say, hey, Moses, we need God's help. Because they know at this point what? They are helpless. It's so interesting what God says to Moses. He says, take a snake made out of bronze, put it on a pole, and say, put it on a stick, and lift it up and say, look at it. He doesn't say make a salve, make a lotion. He doesn't say put something in a glass of water. He doesn't teach him how to do surgery. He says, look at the bronze snake. Now why would he do that? What is he trying to teach these people? That you're never going to be able to save yourself. You're never going to be able to do it yourself, right? It's all about trust. That we are helpless. That's the first step of being born again. To just go to the Lord, to say to Him, there is no way that I am going to be able to do this by myself. So what's the solution? The most famous Bible passage in all the Bible. You heard it today. What is it? For God so loved the world. Why don't you say it with me? For God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son, that whoever believes in Him will not perish, but have eternal life. Yeah. There's the key. Being born again is simply believing that. But here's where the problem comes in. And Frank really touched on it. So often people think this has got to be an emotional experience. It's got to be something that makes me tingly. Am I sure that I'm a Christian? We ask that, but I still sin and so on. How can I be sure? I don't feel like a Christian. Let's talk about your physical life. Are you alive? You better be alive. You're alive. Do you remember when you were born? Was it a pretty emotional experience for you? No. You're alive. You don't remember anything about it. You didn't have anything to do with it. You basically have two choices about the fact that you're alive, right? You can either say, I am alive and I am going to continue to be alive, and I'm going to do everything that I can to continue to be alive. Or you can say, I don't want to be alive anymore and I'm going to kill myself. Those are really the two options you got. Now, is there a difference in the quality of life? Absolutely. You take a guy whose heart stopped last night and he had to have an electrical shock and now he's in ICU being monitored. Is he alive? He's alive, but he's pretty weak. Then you compare that kind of life to a guy participating in a triathlon. There's a huge difference there. But the one thing they have in common is the most important thing. They're both alive. Now, it's not a perfect example, but we can make the connection with spiritual life. It's not a matter of what you feel. It's a matter of what you believe, what God has done for you. And let me ask you, in all seriousness, do you believe that you're helpless before God? Do you acknowledge, I can't do it myself, God? I acknowledge my sin and I take full responsibility. I will no longer blame what I do on other people and say it was because of this or that. I acknowledge it. Do you acknowledge it? Do you believe? Do you believe that Jesus Christ, when He died on the cross, took that sin from you and removed it as far as the east is from the west? Do you believe that when He said it is finished, it meant that your forgiveness is 100% complete? Do you believe that? Now, if you answer yes in both cases, you're alive spiritually. You're born again. You say, but I don't feel tingly. We can put little shockers underneath your seat, make you feel tingly, but that's not all that important. Sometimes you don't feel real healthy and real good physically. It doesn't mean